I'm Ted Snyder. I'm Dean of Yale School of Management, for those of you who are joining from around campus and from the Global Network for Advanced Management. This is a Poynter Fellow lecture, so I wanted to acknowledge the support of the Poynter Fellow program. And we're delighted to have Mr. Chuck Todd here. And many of you know him, but I'll say a few things about him, and then we'll go into a bit of questioning from me, and then open it up to questions from you. And I've also received some questions from members or students at schools in the Global Network, and I may interpose some of those. I'll just say at the outset, it's really a pleasure to have Mr. Todd here. I checked my calendar, and we had booked him 4 years ago, almost 3.5 years ago. And it was October 2012, and he had to cancel. And it turns out he had a good reason, because that was when Sandy struck, and he had some other things he needed to do. But we've been after him for that long, and we're delighted that we've been able to get him back at such an interesting point in the
well, if only Yale cared that much when I was actually applying, you know. That's all right. Better late than never.
All right.
Yeah.
So, actually, before I get into your background, I'm going to do what it's sort of been on my mind. I mentioned to Mr. Todd that I've been a fan of his for many years, and when you were more of a political beat reporter, I didn't know when you did the print/internet stuff before you moved into TV, but it seemed to me that you smiled less and talked more substantively than many of your counterparts on TV. And you don't have to answer this question if you don't want to, but I have
that's had... That's the way I start every Meet the Press interview. You don't have to answer this question if you don't want to.
I've noticed
clearly, we're not going to, give you this slot now.
I think, I have the impression that you would be happy if there was less happy talk among reporters and journalists and commentators, and that you've actually struggled at times engaging in the banter that seems to be so prevalent among cable news and TV talking heads and reporters.
Well, look,
you would rather get down to business.
Well, look, the thing you have to come to accept in television is that it is infotainment. Okay, cable news is infotainment. It's informational. If it's done right, you are helping people learn something. If it's done right, you are educating. If it's done right, but you also have a responsibility to engage, so they stay, so they watch. Why? We're a for-profit enterprise, whether we like it or not. So you're right, there's sometimes I wish we could do without some of this stuff, and I do think we're actually, one of the, I don't want to say it's one of the upsides to Donald Trump. Those phrases are hard to defend. But I will say this, I think Trump has exposed a lot of the ridiculous side of American politics, of campaign politics. And I think that's a good thing. I think he's exposed sort of the absurdity of the campaign finance system a little bit. But he's also, he's pushing everybody to say, hey, don't hold back. Don't try to sugarcoat what you want to say. Now, that doesn't mean you shouldn't do some rounding when you talk. Not everything has to be sharp edges. But I think millennials in general expect a little more straightforward information, a little more straightforward analysis, rather than too much on the one hand, the other hand. That said, there are those of us brought up in a certain style of journalism that says you gotta respect both points of view. You've gotta, and if you the minute you get caught not respecting both points of view, then suddenly you're going to get stuck without ever having a chance to even interview the other point of view. So you're in this sort of conundrum sort of trying to, I don't like the word balance, but making sure you're fair, but at the same time, sometimes you're like, well, I'm not going to say that because it's just going to cause so many problems for the network. Like, you realize, I'm not going to, it's like you want to do X, you want to say X about this campaign tactic, but if you're too honest about it, then you become the story, and you don't want to become the story. And so that's where you sort of, the longer I've done television, the more you sort of understand why. Because I used to be like you, you'd sit there and say, oh, that's a ridiculous, why are we wasting our time putting this on TV? Why are we doing this? Then the more you're in the business, well, at least I understand the rationale. So there is a rationale to the banter and all this stuff, but it doesn't, I get why, yes, there are times you're just like, okay,
we get
enough.
to call you Chuck.
Okay, yeah.
I guess.
Okay.
Is that okay?
It's fine with me.
I mean,
It's fine with me.
Okay.
Mr. Chuck. No.
well, not Dean, Ted, I don't know.
Right.
All right, so we'll go with that. So anyways, I think people know that that Mr. Todd is moderator of Meet the Press. He's NBC's news political director. He also hosts this really terrific show on every day, MTP Daily, which is Meet the Press Daily, which is amazing. And maybe I should just get into substance, because let me just ask you a question. Is Hillary the presumptive nominee?
Well, we treat the phrase, and we were talking about this earlier, we treat the phrase presumptive nominee as a data-driven label. So we're not going to call her presumptive nominee until we actually can count up the number of delegates that hit her magic number. She needs 2383, I think it is. Until she hits 2383, we will not use that phrase technically. We believe it's a technical term. We've always treated it that way. Ditto with Donald Trump. Now, there are the minute we find the number, we will, then we will label her presumptive. Likely nominee, and we actually just had a meeting about this yesterday so the small group of us that do the delegate counting, it's like, all right, what are we going to start calling Hillary? And I'm like, let's wait till the numbers are the numbers. We didn't call Obama presumptive nominee, believe it or not, until after the last day of the primaries, because that's when he didn't hit the number, either with pledge and superdelegates in this case with the Democrats, until that day. And the soonest she could clinch, by our calculations, is May 17th. So she could hit the number then, but if she doesn't hit it then, she won't hit it until June 7th.
So I checked my numbers, and 91% there.
Right.
And 26% of the delegates remain.
Right.
So she might be the likely nominee, but she's not the presumptive.
We're not giving her presumptive. It's interesting, we were having this debate. So if this were a state, an individual state, and the way we project election results, we would project as the based on this.
Yeah.
And so that's part of the debate we had last night, not to get into the weeds, because I would say if this were an individual state with data like this, with a lead that she has, if it were a vote total in a state, we would project her as the winner of that state.
So you could say projected nominee.
Yeah, I know. We're not getting into it, and it's like, it'll be.
That would be confusing because of your other practice.
A, it's confusing, and B, it's to what end? I mean, that was the other thing I said to folks on. It's like, what's the hurry?
But you want to try to reserve this as a technical term.
I do, because, by the way, because there's a chance she could drop dead tomorrow. Okay, anybody could. She could get hit by a bus. She could get indicted by the FBI. She could just up and say, I'm not running. Bernie Sanders is right. You know what? You won't believe the weird stuff I said to Goldman Sachs. Whatever. I mean, the point is that so, and then all of a sudden Sanders, I think we should wait until the numbers are the numbers.
So that's a good transition into what is Bernie Sanders' option value right now? Is it mainly to influence the platform? Mm-hmm. Or is it one of those scenarios where there's a referral by the FBI? or
as I said, The only caucus he has that he could win that could mean something is the FBI caucus. But look, barring that, the reason to stay is to try to, I think, have as much influence as he can on the platform. I actually think he's already blown a couple of opportunities here to establish himself. I mean, he has an opportunity here to be the progressive voice of the Democratic Party. He has chosen, for instance, though, not to get involved in congressional races. And I think that's been a huge mistake. You know, and I said this we did our coverage on this most recent primary night. I was in Philadelphia, and we set up in a bar right next to Independence Square. And Bernie loves to say, "I'm starting a political revolution." Well, one person can't one person can't complete a revolution. You need a lot of people. In Pennsylvania Senate race, for instance, there were three candidates. The most progressive candidate there, a guy named John Fetterman, was a big Sanders supporter, endorsed him early, frankly, often. And then Sanders never reciprocated. In one interview, even said, "I don't know who he is." The point was, the guy ended up, he finished in third, but it was a pretty competitive third. Had Sanders has not gotten involved in a single Senate primary or a single House primary. That's how you build a progressive revolution. And so that's what I mean when I think he has missed an opportunity to flex his. Let's see if his amazing donor network is transferable, right? And I mean, he should want to test that. But there seemed to be I do believe he got into this not believing he was going to be the nominee. He got into this thinking this is a way to raise some issues. And then suddenly he tasted it. And he was like, "Oh my God, I could actually be the nominee." Mm-hmm. And then once you want it, then it's hard to let go. I sort of equate it to, if you've seen the movie Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, the Search for the Holy Grail. So there's that scene where the temple is crumbling there in Petra, even though I actually went to Petra once and I saw it and I was like, "Oh my God, I'm like in the movie scene." And all of a sudden the one woman is like, "Oh my God, I see the Holy Grail." She reaches for it, she can't touch it, and she falls to her death. Then Harrison Ford sees it and he goes, "Oh my God, I can touch it, I can grab it." And Sean Connery says, "Let it go, son." And that's what you want to say to Sanders. Look, man, you ain't getting it. And the farther you reach for it, you're going to say things that you're going to regret. Whatever you think it takes to go and grab it, it's there, but you can't touch it. It's there, but you're not going to get it. So how do you do this in such a way so that maybe you can position somebody who inherits the progressive movement that they can grab it the next time or something like that? And look, I think he's just still coming to terms with this a little bit. But again, I think he's missed already one key moment for him, which he could have started endorsing allies and could have started getting nominees that were of the Sanders mold. And then that's a way to apply even more pressure on the Democratic Party to shift a little bit.
He did seem to pull some punches.
He is now.
Even early on the email.
He always did. This idea that this was a nasty race is a joke. Yeah. I mean, Clinton was pretty nasty. He chose not to run against her on character. He chose to run against her mostly on policy.
Right.
Okay? Obama ran against her as much on character as turn the page, which I always thought was such a brilliant phrase, right? Because when he said turn the page, I'm running, we've got to turn the page. It allowed you to decide what that meant. Yeah, I want to turn the page from Bush. I want to turn the page from the Clintons. I want to turn the page from, whatever it meant to you, right? You could turn the page. And in some ways it was, when you talk to the folks that run it, that was an implicit, like, you know what, the Clintons shouldn't be running the party anymore. It's time for a new generation. It's time to turn the page. And so there was essentially, he was running against the character of the Clintons. And Bernie chose not to do that. I think it was a mistake if you want to win. Okay, that's her greatest vulnerability. Nobody looks at Hillary Clinton and says she's not ready to be president. Nobody looks at her and says she's not, when anybody that has a question about supporting Clinton, forget for non-ideologues, non-conservative ideologues, when you talk to and go into focus groups or you talk to individual voters who maybe, if you read them the list of positions she holds, they say, yeah, I like a candidate that holds those positions, and then you say it's Hillary Clinton. Whatever it is character that's holding them back, right? It's a question of ethics, or it's a question of, I'm exhausted from the drama, that the Clintons bring. That's my wife, by the way. She's was a huge Hillary fan 8 years ago, and she's less so now. She can't put her finger on it. She'll just simply say, it's the drama. I don't know. Are we going to have more of this? But is that the Clintons' fault, right? Or is that the fault of her opponents or whatever? But whatever it is, there is that thing there, and Bernie chose not to run against that. He benefited from it for a while, but he chose not to run against that.
He didn't amplify. He didn't go out. I mean, not only were the Wall Street speeches, there were the speeches to colleges and universities, which I thought represented a much greater vulnerability for her.
Because it was taxpayer money?
I mean, who's paying, from state institutions, higher educational institutions, her?
It was usually private donors,
But as somebody who raises money, I mean, okay.
Really, you wouldn't want to
sort of
you wouldn't have wanted to spend $225,000 to hear Hillary Clinton.
I think you have a choice to have it go to Hillary or to a scholarship,
right.
And so it's not like magenta.
Well, these
money
days, $225,000 pays for at least 1 year of college now, right? You got that.
Okay, let's go to let's change the subject. Quickly.
No.
So back to presumptive nominee.
Yes.
So clearly Trump is not the presumptive nominee.
No.
He's not even.
And I wouldn't even, but we're getting close to saying he's the likely nominee. I mean, I feel comfortable saying that right now. And if he wins Indiana, I think then it's, everybody's going to call him the likely nominee after that. That'll be the term that gets used until he hits the number. Look, I think
he's about 990 delegates.
Right.
And that's 83% of the way. And there are 23.5% of delegates left to be.
He needs to win half of them. He needs to win half of all remaining delegates, pledged delegates, to hit his number. And that's not a bad place to be.
Not a bad place.
Ted Cruz needs to win, I think, 128% of remaining delegates.
Much tougher.
A little tougher. I think Kasich's up to 198% of remaining delegates. So we'll see how that works.
So I don't know if people picked up on this, but last month Chuck Todd introduced this 5 stages of grief, or what was it?
Yeah, we were saying, I just used the 5 stages of grief.
Yeah,
right?
for how the Republicans are dealing with Trump. And you've sort of stuck with it. I think it's fascinating. Denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And it's all happening sort of simultaneously.
It's scary how it worked so well, right? But it's been true. I mean, you've seen that. Think about the bargaining part. Oh, it's to stop Trump, right? We can negotiate our way out of this mess. Depression probably best describes every Republican U.S. senator. There was a great story the other day of literally a survey of one of them saying, well, I'm glad I'm not on the ballot this year. Another one going, I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm going to wait till the convention. So they're in full-on depression mode. But you do see the acceptance of party leaders. And I think it's mostly because of Ted Cruz. If it were Marco Rubio sitting in the Ted Cruz spot, okay, the rallying around Rubio would have been real. If it was Paul Ryan, if it was Scott Walker, if it was Jeb Bush, pretty much, if it was Kasich, pretty much the only person, Rand Paul would have, I'm not kidding, Rand Paul had really sort of improved his relationships with leadership in the Republican Party. John Boehner was quoted yesterday. Have you guys seen this? It's gone viral. It's going yesterday. I think he said, he called him Lucifer. He called Cruz Lucifer and said He'll vote for Trump if he's a Republican nominee. He will not vote for Cruz if he's a Republican
It
nominee.
goes back to what Lindsey
know
Graham
Cruz,
said about
yeah, he
Cruz
said
were.
he'd pick poison over it's poison or being shot.
Yeah, and also if Cruz were murdered.
Yeah.
But
By a U.S. senator, nobody would. There'd be no eyewitnesses, right? There'd be nobody to testify against the.
So does.
But to know Cruz is to not like him in Washington. No, but that has been his problem, and I've gotten to know him. He is more likable than he gets credit for.
He's a real person.
He is almost human. I tease all politicians. I think if you run for president, you have a. I'm convinced that if we sliced open and did DNA studies of anybody that has run for president or been president, we'd know they're different from us. And I'll just leave it at that. I think to look in the mirror and say you want to be leader of the free world and that you think you're better than everybody else in the world at doing this. Think about, that's a massive, that's an unbelievable sized ego that you have to have. God love you, and somebody has to do it.
So does Carly help Cruz in a substantial way?
Look, I admire Cruz for throwing everything at the wall, but this does feel like spaghetti at the wall now. You've got, on Sunday, they announced this alliance, right? Cruz and Kasich, something they should have done 6 weeks earlier.
You were early on that.
Right, well, I actually think the clever way of doing it should have been, we're running as a ticket. We're going to let the convention decide which one is on top and which one is the running mate, but we're running together. We're going to split up the states. A vote for me is a vote for him, and we're going to tell you, whatever, but we're running as a ticket. And yes, we don't agree on everything, but we're going to bring the Republican Party together, and we're going to let the delegates decide which one of us is going to be the presidential nominee, which one of it. Now, obviously, again, I go back to the ego comment. Neither one of their egos could accept this.
Yeah, that DNA doesn't allow that.
It doesn't allow it, right. So they couldn't. So, and look, John Kasich couldn't even bring himself to say vote for Cruz in Indiana. He couldn't even bring himself to say that. And it's a reminder. It's also why I love politics, is there the human factor. No matter how much data you have, the human factor always can upset what should be a straight line of that gets you to a specific result. And so all of a sudden that doesn't work. 2 days later, they're trying this running mate gambit. I actually think it's a good idea, but Carly Fiorina is the exact wrong person. You do this, Reagan did it for one simple reason. Reagan did this in '76 when he came up short. And he named a moderate Republican senator by the name of Richard Schweiker. And the whole reason he picked Schweiker was Pennsylvania had there were at the time 100 unbound delegates that were going to come out of Pennsylvania that were sitting there, and it was just as simple. The Reagan people thought, well, maybe this will help us, and it turned out they couldn't win them. But that's why so this would have made more sense if I go back to my Kasich analogy. It would have made more sense if Rubio. Now I know they did go to Rubio and try to get him to come aboard, because Rubio's sitting on 150 delegates. And all of a sudden, that would be, you're adding 100, that's a pretty good pile. But Rubio didn't want to do it. And I think what happened here is that Cruz, it's not as if, they're not stupid. They know Carly doesn't bring delegates, doesn't bring a state, doesn't bring anything other than it sucked up a news story. And they did it in Indianapolis, and maybe that'll give them some lift there, some minor lift. But it didn't bring any tangible, it doesn't bring a state left. It's not as if she has any California poll. I'm sorry, I don't think she does. She's not even a California voter anymore. She's a registered voter in Virginia. And it doesn't bring any delegates. I think she may have won one or two, because I think New Hampshire and Iowa were both proportional down to zero, meaning there was no threshold. So she may have gotten one or two out of this. But so there's no delegate answer. There's no and she was already a surrogate.
Trump negatives on women.
Well, that's the only.
Provide
I'll tell you this. That was the only upside I could see. It could bait Trump into saying something stupid about women again, right? But do you need Carly Fiorina to do that? I mean, he certainly. does it on his own almost on a daily basis. But, and if you're the Clinton campaign, you're ecstatic that Carly Fiorina is out there right now because she will bait Trump. She is now going to make the case to Republican women why Donald Trump is unacceptable. So even if they fail, a case is being made to Republican women that Donald Trump is unacceptable. Hillary Clinton couldn't ask for somebody better to help her with that right now.
And this will continue.
Should continue
through
on
June 7th.
Through and we'll see how this.
At least.
Well, if Cruz loses Indiana.
Well, that's.
I think it's look. I think that's the other thing here is that Cruz has basically said, to use. I apologize. I'm
30
television. I sit on television too much, which means you metaphor yourself to death. So I apologize for this, but he is going all in, right? He's pushed all his chips in. It's all about Indiana. He wins it, he goes on. He loses it, and I think he will concede.
Okay.
I do think that.
I have one last question, and we will open it up. Of the things that Trump has said that you would put in the category of gaffes or stupid, and there's a long list. What comes to my mind are, women who get abortions or seek abortion should be penalized. Another is that I would be a neutral person in terms of dealing with Palestine and Israel. And, Mexicans are rapists and thieves and drug dealers, and there are many others. Which of the long list do you think will cause him the most damage in the general?
Political damage, I think it's not even close. It's the Hispanic stuff. It's the stuff that he's done to disparage Mexicans, because we're seeing evidence already. There's voter registration is reaching new highs among Hispanics in California already. You're hearing anecdotal stories about Nevada, Colorado Hispanics, Arizona Hispanics. The point is, and when you look at the breakdown between white and non-white voters in the electorate, basically the white share of the electorate has consistently gone down 2 percentage points every 4 years. 2 to 4 percentage points every 4 years. So it was 72 in 12. It's likely to be 69% this time. What is the evidence? Obama won about 80% of the non-white vote against Mitt Romney. What is the evidence that Donald Trump will do better among non-white voters than Mitt Romney? I'll put it into another statistical comparison. So Mitt Romney won 59% of the white vote. That was the highest percentage that any Republican presidential candidate had gotten of the white vote since 1988. George H.W. Bush, he won 59% of the white vote. Now, 59% of the white vote in 1988 was worth 400 electoral votes. He won an electoral landslide against Michael Dukakis. 59% of the white vote in 2012 was worth 200 electoral votes. Okay, that tells you, that is the simplest to me explanation of the demographic disaster that the Republicans are facing. Look, I don't think whoever they nominated, the Republicans nominated, was facing this the demographic headwind. Now, I think there are some electable Republicans in a demographic headwind if Hillary Clinton is the Democratic nominee, but to alienate Hispanics, I don't think a Republican can win the presidency with 35% of the Hispanic vote. I think you have to get it to in the 40s to even have a shot. If you don't win 40%, if your number is under 35% of Hispanics, you're going to lose Florida, you're going to lose Colorado, you're going to lose Nevada, you're likely to lose Virginia. People also forget, when you talk about the Hispanic vote in swing states, first, you'll go to the first 3 or 4 I just mentioned. Fastest growing demographic group in North Carolina is Hispanics. In 2008, if there were no Hispanics in Indiana or North Carolina, McCain would have carried both states. It was Obama's performance among Hispanics that put him over the top in both Indiana and North Carolina. Now, it's still 4, 5, 6% of the electorate, But if you're winning that part of the electorate 70-30, and against Trump, she could win Hispanics 75-25. She could win them 80-20. And it's going to put Arizona in play. It's going to put Georgia in play. It's going to take Nevada off the table. It's going to take New Mexico, which should be a swing state. George W. Bush carried it in 2004. Take it off the table. Colorado, off the table. Texas isn't there yet. Texas isn't there yet because Texas and California are very interesting when you look at the Republican Party's history with Hispanics. In 1994, a Republican governor of California by the name of Pete Wilson was running for re-election. He thought it was going to be a tough re-election fight, and there was a proposition on there called Prop 187. And it was basically it got thought of. It was a pretty. It was I guess an anti-affirmative action thing when it comes to Hispanic voters and all Hispanics, excuse me, in general. Anyway, it just became this a galvanizing anti-Hispanic initiative as far as the voters were concerned. It passed. Pete Wilson wins re-election. It alienated Hispanics so much. Hispanics were pretty much a 60-40 split in California before 1994 and Prop 187. And then the Hispanic vote became overwhelmingly Democratic within half a cycle. In 1996, I remember just 2 years later, Orange County, California, there was a guy named Bob Dornan. Orange County's the rock bed of the conservative movement back in the day, where sort of Reagan Republicanism, the home of Reagan Republicanism, and an Hispanic Democrat won a congressional seat out there. And everybody's like, what is this? What's going on here? And it was basically, that's where the tide had turned. And you saw, and then that's essentially starting in 96 where you really saw that California just went deep blue because Hispanics essentially rushed over to the Democratic Party, feeling as if the Republicans alienated them. Texas Republicans were much different with Hispanic voters. And to this day, Rick Perry did well with Hispanics. George W. Bush did well with Hispanics. There's been a different, and you hear it in the tone that both Bush and Perry, both of them pretty conservative guys, but they've always taken a different tone. And Texas in general, it's Hispanics a little more integrated in Texas. And it's not to say that there isn't pockets there in Texas, but there's a reason why the Republican Party is still afloat there, because they've made efforts to reach out to the Hispanic community. There's a lot of successful Hispanic Republicans in Texas politics. So it's still, it is a swing demographic group. Now,
but you're saying
if they're not careful,
it's much better insulated from this kind of.
From this, even now, I don't think Trump's going to do well. Even he'll win Texas, but it will be. I bet it's a pretty because you'll see some erosion. He'll do better among Hispanics in Texas than anywhere else, simply because there are more Hispanic Republicans in Texas. But
okay, great.
It's going to be. Texas isn't there yet.
All right. Thank you. Mm-hmm. We have questions, I bet, and microphones, and let's start with the gentleman in the back.
Thanks for being here. I have a question about how you think about your responsibility as a journalist while reporting the news. I think that one of the things that's been discussed a lot in this election cycle is the responsibility of journalists both to call out the candidates when they are either bending the truth or just lying, but then also how Trump has been covered. People are saying, obviously, that he's getting covered too much and that's helping him. Just curious how you think about both of those things and those types of questions.
Well, look, I will say this: when it comes to Sunday and Meet the Press, you asked me what is my first responsibility in my head, and what I have, and this is something that we have seen actual feedback from viewers: education. The number one reason why people watch Sunday shows in general, and why they come to watch Meet the Press, they tell us, is to be educated on a particular topic, on a particular candidate, on whatever it is. Basically, I want to understand X better. I want to know, and they have different reasons for it, for their own self-edification, to be better informed with friends and family, be better informed, or whatever the reason is. So that actually, I found that to be an uplifting thing. I remember I get the job, and the next day they hand me this. Well, here's all the research we've done to try to figure out what's wrong with Meet the Press, type of thing. So they hand me this packet before, and so I was gratified to know that viewers, they want to learn something. That's great, right? What an opportunity. I know that's not totally I think what you're asking is more about day-to-day coverage and on air. It's interesting when it comes to this idea, you call somebody out when they're lying. If a journalist is going to call a candidate a liar, you better know that you have that solid. And the fact of the matter is, as we know, many of the disputes and what one person thinks is that some candidate is telling a lie, they will say, we're having a dispute, what I call on future facts. Because when you say, well, that doesn't make any sense, that's not going to work, and they'll say, well, if we do it exactly this way, we don't know. We've never tried it my way, right? That's why you got to be careful. People will sit there and say, so-and-so lied. Why can't you call them out on that? I'm like, I don't necessarily know that's a lie. Let me tell you what that is a large charge coming from me, number one, if I do it that way. I better have it ice cold. That doesn't say when you do have it, you're like, wait a minute, that's just not true. Speaking of Carly Fiorina, I ended up going down a rabbit hole with her. We went basically 6 minutes just on the Planned Parenthood videos about 6 months ago. And it was like she insisted that this was happening. I said, it's a reenactment. No, it's not. It's right there in the video. It's a reenactment. It was just like she was failing to accept the premise. There's only so much you can do. I am a person that believes in light over heat. I believe my audience at Meet the Press is a pretty bright audience. I think they know when I try to go back at somebody 2 and 3 times and they still don't answer the question, they know, okay, that person is afraid to answer the question, which guess what? They've answered the question. It means they don't, So, and I believe Sunday morning's about light more than heat. As far as Trump is concerned, this is a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation. Trump has not gotten good media coverage. If you were to just say, he gets more negative than positive. If somebody were to do that measurement, I think there's a couple of academics that do this all the time. They measure positive versus negative. I would bet he's gotten more negative coverage than any presidential candidate this century. But then there's an argument that says, well, just the saturation of the coverage raises his name ID and it hasn't mattered. This is where I would say this, which is other politicians could learn something from Trump. Don't be afraid of the press. If you saturate the press, you could treat it like I call it he almost treats it like if you're a football fan, and my apologies if you're not, but there's something called the spread offense, where the idea is you put out as many people to go out for a pass as you can, because the opponents can't double team everybody, right? And so then the idea is, well, somebody might be open, and it's a way of spread. Well, Donald Trump practices sort of the spread offense of gaffes, right? He'll make a gaffe at 7 a.m. in a phone conversation with the Today Show. At 7:15, call into Fox and Friends, make another one. People are chasing that one. Meanwhile, he's done this, and and then at 8:05, he's called in the radio show over here, whatever it is. And he's proven that if you sort of isolate yourself and only do an interview the way the Clintons used to do it, only every once in a while, then number one, you raise the stake for that one interview. So then if you're terrible at it, it is the moment, it is everything. If you put yourself out everywhere, then no one thing, unless it's a real doozy, is going to get traction. So as a strategy Trump is doing, it's actually smart strategy, especially if you're it's a smart strategy for an undisciplined candidate, right? This would be a terrible strategy for a disciplined candidate, because eventually people would stop inviting you on if you always said the same thing over and over again and you couldn't be pushed off your talking points. There'd be some boredom with that. One thing about Trump is he's not boring. So he's taken advantage of also the fact of he knows that, we're in the cable news wars, right? He knows it, and he's helping to be a pawn. He loves being a pawn in the cable news wars because he's not a pawn, but it looks like that he is. But if we weren't asking him questions and we weren't covering him and saying, boy, then people would say you're not surfacing his positions on all these things. So I'll tell you that nothing. Right now, our news environment is such where everything is saturation, and I think this is more. I think what Trump is more of a symbol of sort of where we are with our media culture right now, right? Where every major we cover any incremental development in a big story as if it's Superstorm Sandy. As if it's and we seem to be. So there's no, and I think because of that, it feels like Trump gets amplified even more all the time. So there are definitely different ways that I wish we did cover Trump, but to borrow a Donald Rumsfeld phrase, you cover him with the tools that you have, not the tools that you want. So.
Okay, one question right here.
Almost along the same lines, but why do you think the unacceptable? I mean, back in the day when I went to school for journalism, we reported on politics.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't opine about politics. So it seems that it's become acceptable. And I look at the Huffington Post and you see what they want to write down the bottom of every single story related to Trump. And then, Morning Joe, it's a discussion of the backlash of the public against the media.
Mm-hmm.
When the media has put itself in the middle of actually being the commentator on the candidates, one, doesn't the public have a right to start distrusting them? And then two, why is it becoming acceptable in the industry for that to be okay?
Well, that's an interesting way of putting it. I guess I don't accept all of your premise, and I'll tell you why. Because so I get my back up on this media bashing a little bit because, look, it's a tactic, okay? Roger Ailes has perfected it. He started this for Nixon. Okay, this is a creation of one individual who probably has done more to destroy the credibility of journalism than any other individual. In some ways, he's a brilliant television mind. But he has created this perception that the media is biased against conservatives. They started this with Nixon, and it is built and built and built. So it's become this campaign. And the media we don't fight back, right? Because we're neutral. We want to be neutral. We're the observer. In a war, we have a pencil, all right? We don't have a weapon. Everybody else is shooting, you're right? So whatever. And I think what's happened over time, obviously, is that, look, I think the media gets way too much credit for being a player. I get confused sometimes. Either we're irrelevant or we have too much influence. And on any given day, I get criticized for both. For trying to influence the election or, you're meaningless now, we don't need you type of thing.
So could I,
No, okay.
yeah, let me just try to tie in another question, which comes from the Sauder School which is part of the Global Network. And a student there, Violetta, was basically asking something similar. Even if we don't agree exactly what's going on, the phenomenon is real. And the Meet the Press is maybe more exceptional in terms of pushing more weighted towards education. And a lot of the other discussion is a less educational. I don't know if you would agree with that, but you don't have to.
I think it depends. I think the goal is the same.
Okay. But if you had more bandwidth on Meet the Press and you had more issues that you would like to cover, what would they be? I mean, if there was less somewhat superficial kind of discussion, what are the missing? Put this differently.
Yeah.
What else should we be focusing on with this election? I mean, what's going to really come out of this?
All right. Well, if you want, I believe there are three major challenges for the next president. And we're only vaguely talking about 2 of them pretty well. I think the 3 major challenges are, 1, America's economic anxiety. It's real. We don't know. The problem is, and it's like, why don't people feel the economic recovery? There's a number of reasons why. You guys, many of you probably have studied this more than I have, but they're different. But one of them is the anxiety of what's the job picture going to look like for my kids, right? We're now 4 years in a row where a majority of the country believes their children are not going to be better off than they are. So and what is that about? That's economic anxiety. It's not understanding, and part of that is we're in a transition between the industrial and this, whatever this new thing is going to be called. And I say whatever. Some people say we're headed to a service sector economy. Some people think we're, it could be something. We don't fully understand what it is, and I think that we don't know what it looks like, so there's fear of the unknown, which is a natural human instinct, and that anxiety is there. The second thing is, so there's economic anxiety.
To the root of that, the causes.
Getting to the root of that.
How do we deal with it policy-wise?
There's one basic way of dealing with it. Like, this left behind generation that is supporting Trump, and to a lesser extent Sanders, that are feeling desperate right now. We failed to educate them. I think that's number 1 where we failed, right? If you look at it, these are folks that they were brought up thinking that a high school education or maybe some technical training would be enough to have a good middle class life, just like their dad or mom and dad had. And so that's missing, and of course that's why both Trump and Sanders in their own way are talking to these voters going, boy, you guys have really gotten the shaft and all this stuff. But let me finish the 3 here. So 1 is economic anxiety. The second is, how do we use our superpowers around the world, right? We know we're the superpower of the world, but we don't seem to know how to use our superpower anymore. And maybe it's just harder, right? For the same reason it's harder to do journalism, for the same reason it's harder to do where everything is, it is harder to do diplomacy. It's harder to do politics anymore, right? The more, people talk about the good old days of politics and Congress used to get things done. There was horse trading and compromises were coming out. Yeah. But don't forget, those compromises were done sometimes, maybe for the greater good, but there were individuals that only cared about the compromise for their own benefit, right? They wanted some road paved in their congressional district or some bridge built in exchange for their vote on this, right? And we have now a culture that exposes that, and we don't like that anymore. And we've said that's no good. Okay, we've done this on the international stage, diplomacy. Why did Jim Baker so easily put together a coalition in 1990? I've had a conversation with this. Well, in 1990, you could buy allies and get away with it. You can't buy allies and get away with it anymore. It's just harder to do. The same way, right? We're a much more transparent society around the world. So it's harder to conduct diplomacy in the old ways that we used to conduct diplomacy. And frankly, because there's no, in some ways the Cold War helped keep the world stable as well. And we don't have that there. Anyway, the point is that we don't have, I think Obama's tried to figure it out, Bush tried to figure it out, Clinton tried to figure it out, and we haven't found the calibration yet of how we use our superpower. The third, and I think the single most important issue facing the next president, is our broken political marketplace. And this ties into your question about the press, right? We've got distrust in the media. It's ideologically driven. It's mostly done for people's own politics. They're doing it for their own gain, or in the case of some conservative media outlets, simply to build an audience and to make money. And that's fine, but we've got a broken political marketplace as far as the media is concerned. Our campaign, the rules of politicking are broken. Campaign finance, but even the way we draw our districts, the way we vote. It's, the redistricting, we've isolated ourselves. The Republican Party's demographic problem starts with the fact that they drew out diversity. They made sure to represent districts that didn't look like America. And then they wonder when they run statewide or they run nationally, how do we talk to Hispanic voters? How do we talk to, and there are some Republicans in Congress who get this and say, you know what, we messed up. The reason why, it's self-reinforcing. Technology allowed you to draw these perfect congressional districts as far as you were concerned politically to win them. But then it took away voting. If you take away swing voting incentives from politicians, if politicians don't feel like there are any swing voters to worry about, well, then they get to, then they feel comfortable voting a certain way when they're in office. So anyway, so we've got a broken way we draw, and this is what we have to fix. You're not going to be able to, we have to reorient the relationship between government and the American worker. And it's going to take, we got to rewrite our workers' comp laws. We're in the, look at how painful healthcare was. We've got to rework retirement laws. We got to, the future of workers are not going to be one individual working for full-time for one company, right? It is probably going to be this gig economy where more and more companies are going to hire a piece of you, and everybody is going to be their own, they're not fully self-employed, but more like a freelancer in some form or another, where you'll work for 3 or 4 entities. And the protections that working for one company give you on the benefit front, you now are going to have to find in your own way. And we just, all of our tax law, everything is written under the assumption that you work for one entity. And so my point is, we got to restructure a lot of things. Well, you can't do that if you have a broken political system, because it'll be too easy. I was talking to a Democratic senator who was articulating this to me, and he said, my party will, they won't, we have to rethink how we do Social Security and how we do payroll taxes. Just, in some cases, there'll be more money in this bucket, but in some cases, we may get rid of Program Y. Well, as you know, no Democratic, leader will ever want to get rid of Program Y, and so this is a bipartisan challenge. But if we have this broken Congress that doesn't work, which if we have a broken political marketplace, which then drives people away from running for office, we don't get good people to run for office anymore, especially for the down ballot. You get fewer and fewer because you talk to them, and you'll realize people say, what a mess. I don't want to, what if I win? I won't be able to get anything done. Like, it's, there's a, I won't name him, but there's this one senator who just won recently, and he's just, wow, I didn't realize we didn't do anything. He's like, it's frustrating for somebody who was successful in one walk of life to walk into Congress and realize how little you can accomplish and how little you can do. And to me, that's the number one challenge facing the president, is how do we restore some confidence in our political marketplace?
So that's great. Economic anxiety, what's superpower?
Yeah, what is our superpower, right?
And this broken system. I think we only have time for one more question, so this is tough. You get it, sir, right here. Yeah. Right.
No, I'm not. My hand's not raised.
Okay. Blue sweater.
Oh, I'm kidding.
Yeah. Sorry.
Thanks, Jennifer.
Sorry, I blew it.
Approach your mic, please.
Yeah. Yeah. Press and hold.
Got it. So 2 questions.
No.
All right.
And it's got to be short because we have
So I'll go with
2
the hard
minutes.
One. Okay.
Thank you.
So I just find it surprising that the Clintons still have, such a stronghold on the party 28 years after Bill Clinton's emergence at the '88 convention.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just wondering, and one would have thought that the '08.
It's remarkable, isn't it? I think about this all the time. My entire professional career in political journalism has been covering the Clintons, it feels like. I started in 1992.
So do you think the chaos on the Republican side is actually hiding some kind of weakness on the Democratic side? Or what do you think is going on in the Democratic Party?
If it weren't for Donald Trump, and the biggest story in American politics would be Bernie Sanders. If it weren't for the fractured, for what looks like fracticide, frankly, sometimes, but if it weren't for the what's going on inside the Republican Party in general, we'd be talking about all these problems inside the Democratic Party. But the fact of the matter is the Republican Party is in much worse shape than the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party is simply the cleanest pair of dirty underwear in the hamper. And so, but that isn't, look, it is, when you have the White House, you can paper over your problems. All right, the Republican Party had these problems during the Bush years, but they had the White House, and you paper it over. Parties, it is amazing. People political party, for the most part, fall in line if you have the White House, right? And everybody will sort of stay under that banner. And you've seen that with the Democrats. Well, now with Obama walking away, you're starting to see a little bit of the tension inside the party. I think there's going to be demographic tension. I think there's going to be ideological tension, and there's certainly generational tension. And some of it is the circles overlap, right? Look, there's an endurance to the Clintons that I think they're sort of, our political system sort of rewards surviving sometimes, and their ability not to walk away from the stage, not to get fed up and just go, is probably why they don't accept losing as the sign of they're done, right? They could have. So there's just something, whatever it is in their DNA. And I think, look, I've always thought part of Hillary Clinton's drive comes from Bill. She's not a natural politician. And she says it, but she's not. She is, and I think she'd be, if she had never touched the presidency, she'd have been just as happy, probably, running an agency, running a UN charter, running something, but running a nonprofit or doing something of, maybe it would have been just running Children's Defense Fund. I think when you get a taste of the power of the White House and the ability to do what you want to do. And I think the other thing that really drives the Clintons is that Bill Clinton believes he never got a second term, right? He only really got one term to try anything. And his second term was bogged down by the impeachment. And I've always believed that basically what drives Hillary more than anything else is this opportunity to get a second term, a second chance at the White House. And I think it's in their minds, a redemption, some form of redemption. Their popularity is some redemption, his personal popularity, but it's not enough. Like one more shot.
So it really is an enduring alliance between the two of them.
Yeah, no, look, I'm not going to, I don't want, their marriage, I'm not going to put it on account. My grandparents had a screwed up marriage. They didn't live together. They stayed married and they didn't live together for 25 years. And they were best friends. So, and they talked every day. They just didn't want to live in the same house. So I can't sit here, I hate when we,
But you think part of Hillary's drive is to give the Clintons a second?
Yeah, I think you can't.
That's interesting.
There's, look, there's always some personal, they'll never say it, but there's always, for anybody that runs for office, I believe that there was redemption in Bush's, that part of Bush's motivation was to redeem his dad.
Right, of course.
Part of I don't think Al Gore ever wanted to be president, but he ran because of his dad. He was bred to run for president, right? He was raised to be a president, so he felt like it was his duty to do this. And then once he lost, then I think we all saw he was oddly relieved. No, but I think he felt that it was a burden to him. What I'm saying is there's always some, there's a personal reason. There's always some other reason why somebody runs.
I think we have to close off, unfortunately. I do wanted to, I try to think a little bit about my own personal takeaways. And before thanking you, I'll just say, I think your three sort of big things that confront the country and going forward that don't get enough attention right now, I think a really useful framework for me. On the first one, we do talk about this issue of economic anxiety a lot here. And if I had to predict what's going to actually come out of the cycle, really is a mismatch to a sustainable kind of approach to the underlying problem. I think I'm not against higher minimum wages, but that's really not a solution. I'm not, tightening up the border, I think will come out of the election cycle with some decent probability. I don't think that's a solution to this underlying issue that you're talking about. And I think we're going to get non-trade barriers. And a lot of the people here are concerned about visas, H-1 visas. And I think your point on getting people where they're, the modern world is a human capital world.
No, it's funny you say this, and this was the conversation I had with this one senator who does come from the business world, but he used that phrase with me. He said, the tax code was designed to help, there's parts of the tax code that help businesses, sometimes you write down capital and all this stuff, but you never consider human beings capital. And it's like, well, the new service economy means that we are capital. And so we have to restructure.
How do you contract?
How do you do this? And this is the role government has to play. And it's not a job creator, we know this, but it is sort of, there is an infrastructure it's outdated, okay? Our infrastructure that supports employment in this country is just simply outdated. And we don't have the political maturity to do it. And that's the scary part of what's ahead. Because everybody in this, we all logically know the different things that have to be done. But we are in I don't think that the political system right now is in a place to do it.
So let me close this off by saying thank you to all of you. Thanks to, I didn't get to the sufficient number of questions from the
I talked too much, blame me.
No, it was great. And I just wanted to go back to your point about Meet the Press and education. I think, I just want to say I have a lot of admiration for what you do.
Well, you kind of say that.
I told Chuck Todd before he arrived here, I'm a fan, and he's got a disciplined way of thinking about things, and it's really great that you're in this role. So keep it going, and come back anytime.
Well, all right, thanks.